Investigators are trying to determine why a 21-year-old man allegedly opened fire on a 4th of July parade in a Chicago suburb.
That's right. It happened Monday morning, just before 10:30 a.m. local time in Highland Park, Illinois. Police say a gunman on a rooftop fired into the crowd, killing 6 people and injuring more than 24 others. Officials say those shot range in age from 8 to 85. Hours later, police arrested a person of interest. Charges have not yet been filed against him, but the mayor of Highland Park tells CBS News those charges could come later today.
CBS News correspondent Kris Van Cleave is in Highland Park with the very latest. So, Kris, what are you learning about the victims of the shooting?
Well, Tanya and Elaine, we know that there were dozens of people that were wounded or injured as a result of this shooting. In fact, there's a hospital just a few minutes from here that handled 25 gunshot wounds yesterday. In about a 12-hour period, they treated and released 19 of them. We also know, of course, that 6 people lost their lives. Of the 25 that went to that hospital, at least 4 were children. We're hearing the number maybe closer to about 30 people who suffered gunshot wounds, and then some other injuries from the folks rushing to get away as well. One of the remarkable things is that so many people survived, given that this was a high-power rifle that was being used. We don't have a ton of detail on all 6 of the victims who lost their lives. We know at least 2 have been identified. One, Nicholas Toledo. He was a grandfather visiting from Mexico, visiting his family here in the U.S., was excited to go to the parade and be with family on July 4th. Another, Jackie Sundheim, who was involved in the local Jewish community here. She a teacher for some time and well known and loved there. We also know Zoe Kilpatrick. She was a teacher. She and her husband and 2 other members of her family were shot and wounded in front of Zoe's children. We understand they are recovering from their injuries at this point. And of course, we'll learn more about those who survived and those lives that were lost as this process goes on. We're not far now from a media briefing from police and the coroner's office that likely will give us a little bit more information into the investigation.
Kris, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you're hearing on the ground there from the community. Not too long ago, I was in your shoes in Uvalde reporting exactly on what you're reporting, another horrific shooting in this country. And I'm curious, at what stage is the community there in right now? Because as we know, this sort of horrific event sort of impacts the community in various stages.
Yeah, people here in Highland Park woke up to the reality that they have joined an all too long list of communities that have suffered this kind of massive tragedy. Shell-shocked would probably be a good way to describe it. We spoke earlier this morning with a doctor who was just up the street here with his elderly parents, his wife, when the shooting happened. He got them to safety and he turned around and came back. He'd worked in ERs, he'd done emergency medicine, so he came to help. And what he said, he said, I've been an emergency room doctor in Chicago. I've seen gunshot wounds, but this was battlefield medicine we were doing. This was a high-powered rifle, and that has catastrophic impacts when a high-power rifle fires and strikes a person. So some people he was able to save, some he was not. So there is outrage, there is horror, there is shock, and this will be a cycle of emotions. Right now, people are pretty willing to tell their stories and talk about what happened yesterday, and soon I expect that this community will want some peace and quiet to grieve.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting hearing you describe the injuries of the guns. These high-powered rifles are just meant to decimate a human body. I mean, that's one of the things that's so apparent in these shootings is the frustration of the medical community that's trying to actually save those people that were shot, and so much devastation occurs that in so many cases they simply can't.
Yeah, I was listening to the doctors at the Highland Park Hospital here talk about some of the injuries, and one of them was a child, and normally they would transfer the child to a children's hospital, to a facility that specializes in pediatrics, but this child was too critical to move, so the ER docs had to go in and stabilize and in a way sort of rebuild what was damaged by the gunfire enough to stabilize this child, so a child could be airlifted to Children's Hospital. I mean, what's different about a high-powered rifle round is when it goes in, it kind of tumbles, almost like explodes from the inside, and it just shreds parts of the body in a way that a pistol just doesn't. It is why they talk about that battlefield medicine. But one of the other things we've learned from battlefield medicine is there's this golden hour. If you can get somebody to hospital-level care within an hour of a traumatic wound, their chance of survival is much higher. And that's part of what we saw here yesterday. You know, most of the people that were wounded are alive today.
I mean, it's truly horrific, though, Kris, as you describe just how absolutely devastating these weapons can be. And as Tanya points out, the frustration among medical professionals in trying to deal with these kinds of injuries among people who are just out to watch a parade. Kris Van Cleave in Highland Park, Illinois. Kris, thank you.
Thanks, Kris. We're going to go now to CBS News senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge for more on the status of the investigation. Hi, Catherine. So what role are federal agencies like the FBI and ATF playing in this case?
Well, Tanya, in this case, the FBI and the ATF have major organizations and operations in Chicago. So based on my reporting, they were able to provide a surge capability to the authorities in Highland Park who are in the lead. They did so to really support two tracks in this case. The first priority was this manhunt that led to the capture of a person of interest within hours of the attack. And the second more involved element or track is the investigative track. You have to think about this as a crime scene on the scale of the Boston Marathon bombing back in 2013. And this is where the FBI's evidence response team coming out of Chicago has been really crucial to the operation and the progress of the local investigation, because you've not only got DNA, you've got sort of mapping the crime scene, but I want to draw your attention now to the ballistics and the shell casings, because not a lot of people realize that those ballistics and those shell casings have a fingerprint, kind of like their own DNA, and being able to take that evidence and marrying it up with the rifle that was recovered can help investigators understand if that was the kill weapon, right, in this case. And they need to have that information if they're going to bring charges against the person of interest.
Another key component, as you know, Catherine, in these kinds of investigations is the digital trail that is left behind. And I'm wondering how social media might be playing a role in this particular case.
Well, Elaine, based on my reporting here at CBS News, this again is where the feds have had a major role supporting the local investigation. One thing the FBI is extremely good at, and it really began to develop with the Boston Marathon bombing, is the intake of social media, videos, photographs from the scene, and being able to use artificial intelligence to screen that material to try and identify a subject. Just think back to yesterday when we had that initial news conference. At that time, they put out a call to the public for help. That told us that they did not have a suspect identified, and using that kind of media or digital tips allowed them to identify somebody within hours and then effect that arrest.
Catherine Herridge, thank you so much for your insight into this investigation. We appreciate it.